Right. Well, welcome everybody. I see some familiar names on the screen from earlier sessions today. So welcome. I'm glad you came back and to check out building resilience in students. I just feel like this is the year that we really need to lift up our students, but also our adults too, because I feel like we're all last year we were running on whatever reserves we had, and now like we're running on fumes and they're starting to go. And I feel like our students are there too. So just to kind of, I'm going to remember to share my screen. This is going to be the first time in the 3 sessions that I've done today that I remember to share my screen before we got started. So um, just to give you a little bit of background about me, I'm Amy Wassman. I'm the Whole Child Program Director for Saginaw ISD. I've been in that role for almost 14 years. I jokingly say when someone asks me what's a Whole Child Program Director do, I'm like, well, if it's not math, science, social studies, or ELA, it falls under my world. So I get to do all kinds of really fun things in my role, from working with our teachers around SEL and whole child supports to working with our health and PE teachers around the work that they do. We also do HIV and sex ed instruction for our teachers and our special ed teachers. We have a program called Project Dottie, which is getting feminine care products in school bathrooms, into student bathrooms. For individuals who need them. They can take as many as they want, because basically what we found is we actually had a call from one of our more affluent school districts asking if there were any grants available for feminine care products. And because they had students who were actually missing school because they didn't have them at home. And so when we looked at this and I talked with our truancy officer, she's like, oh yeah, we have students missing all the time for this. And I'm like, this is not okay. So we have the Dottie project and we received some funds to basically provide easily accessible products in the bathrooms. And that's kind of my one requirement is we don't want them in the office. We don't want them in a counselor's office that might be busy half the time and you can't access. We wanted them easily accessible. And so that has been a huge thing. So that's just one of the fun things that I get to do, one of many. But just recently, this week, I am accepted a position at MDE as the SEL school consultant. So I am looking forward to that transition as well. But really, social emotional learning, not only for students, but for adults, is kind of my main interest and what I feel very passionately about. When we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we see like we need to meet those basic needs and we need to meet those social emotional needs for our students in order for them to be successful, not only in the classrooms academically, but also in life when they leave our programs and get jobs and careers. And so making sure that we do that. I had an earlier session on SEL strategies in the classroom. This is going to be things that we can do more at a building level initiative, where that was very specific on what classroom teachers could do. As an overview, what we're going to talk about is why is resilience so important. I'm only going to hit on that really short because I feel like we already have that information. We got it down. But I do want to hit on what the data says, and to kind of give you an idea of maybe where to look to see what areas of resilience you need to focus on or you would want to focus on. And then how do we build those skills within our students? And then looking really at those systemic practices that we can implement. And then finally, I want this to be very engaging and interactive. So if you have things that you're doing in your building and you're rocking it, tell us. If you have things in your building that you thought you were going to rock and didn't, share that with us too. So we can figure out like maybe we need to tweak it differently, or But really, I want to hear what you're thinking and what you're planning as well, because we learn from each other. And honestly, I am not in the classrooms anymore. So I get a lot of my ideas just talking with people like you, talking with educators about what's working, doing some research, listening to schools talk about their success stories, and then sharing that out as well. So I am not the knower of all, but I'm the knower of some. So this week I was at MDE's Social Emotional Learning conference, Building Bridges, Breaking Down Silos. And they had a student group, panel that was amazing. And the one thing that really, there was a lot that they said that was just awe-inspiring. But the one piece was students are the primary stakeholders in the school. And I think sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we forget that because we have state legislation that's kind of dictating what we do. Sometimes we have parents who are, maybe a little more vocal about what their needs are versus the students. And this really hit home to kind of center what we're going through and what we're talking about, that really we're here for students, and how do we support students, and how do we lift them up and build up that resilience. But when we look at why it's necessary, really what we're wanting our students, we've called SEL so many different things over the years. We've called it soft skills. We've called it character ed. We've called it so many things, but the commonality, no matter what label it's had over the 25 years that I've been working, 25-ish years that I've been working in the educational system, is really being able for them to recognize and manage their own behaviors. That's key. You see that need at the preschool level, and you see that at the post-secondary level and everything in between. They also we want students to understand and teens to understand feelings of others. So that empathy and that perspective, that other perspective. But we also want to build them up in that sense of independence and self-worth. We talked about in one of our sessions this morning about how students are apologizing for bothering us when they have an issue, or they're apologizing for feeling a certain way. And we want them to feel valued and supported in that no feeling is a wrong feeling, and that we are there to lift them up and to listen and to be that shoulder. But we also want to give them that sense of purpose. So really goal setting and problem solving and future thinking is really key in that. And then finally, we really want to build up those healthy and positive behaviors or relationships. And so what does that look like? Giving them the skills to differentiate between a healthy relationship and an unhealthy one, whether it's romantic or whether it's a friendship or whether it's a family type of relationship. What's healthy, what's not healthy? What we're finding, and I don't know about you, you can put this in the chat if you want, but we are hearing in Saginaw County from our businesses that they are seeing employees or potential employees really lacking those social emotional learning skills. They're lacking some of those skills that are very much needed in order for them to be successful in their employment. We're hearing businesses saying, at this point, we will teach them how to do their job, but we can't teach them how to think for themselves or to be able to problem solve on the spot, and to work independently, and not have someone tell them what to do all of the time. Like we are needing new employees that already have some of those skills. And so really it's important, if we are looking at that college career and community ready, which is a term that I had heard this week that I thought I would share because I liked it. But really looking at that career readiness, how can they be successful, productive citizens once they graduate? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. As far as looking at lessons, does anyone do the Myfi survey? If you want to raise your hand or give me a thumbs up or type in, I'm seeing some head shaking. I want to briefly go over what the Myfi is. So if you are in, any of you working with just adults, or are you more like alternative ed, late teens, early, you could probably still use this. They do ask what grade students are in. You could probably, if you wanted this data for your teens, have them pick 9th or 11th grade, because the survey only surveys 7th, 9th, and 11th grade students. But for when I work with our alternative ed schools, I often say, just have all of your students pick 9th grade or 11th grade, because our schools aren't huge. And so you want enough data to make it anonymous enough for you to get data back that you can view. But the Myfi survey hits on a lot of different topics, but two of the topic areas is mental health data and then school domain data, which is really that sense of belonging and that feeling of having a voice in their school. And I feel like those are two really great resources to utilize just to try to gauge how engaged are your students. How can we maybe increase engagement by looking at some of this data? The Myfi survey was created by Michigan Department of Ed. It's offered every other year. It's an electronic survey and it's free to use. It is a Myfi year this year, so if it's something you want more information on, reach out to me, or if you Google Myfi, you can access it pretty easily online. What's key is the Myfi survey really does hit on a lot of the SEL competencies. When you're looking at self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and that social awareness piece, Myfi's topics really hit on that. So not only are they looking at those risk behavior pieces like substance misuse, bullying, aggression, mental health issues around suicide, it also looks at how involved are they in the school community? What is the perceived support of the teachers? Do they have quality relationships with their peers? And so it really looks at a variety of pieces. I pulled up Saginaw County data, and this was from 2 years ago. And when we look at the mental health needs, it's pretty staggering when we look at how many of our students are depressed. I want you to keep in mind that these surveys were completed before we shut down with COVID. And I say that because this year, I think we're going to see these percentages increase with everything that's been going on with COVID. So in Saginaw County, our 7th grade students that took the survey, 1 in 3 experienced depression. When you look at the percentages in parentheses, these are our students who identified as AB students, and these are our students who self-identified as receiving mostly D's and E's. So when we're looking at who's engaged versus who's not, who's experiencing maybe more mental health issues than others, we need to look at that whole data piece. When we look at who's contemplated suicide, 27% of our 7th grade students 2 years ago contemplated suicide. 25% of our students who were AB students said they thought about suicide, but over half of our students who identified as failing said that they had contemplated suicide. And then looking at 27% purposely hurting themselves, like cutting, all non-life threatening, but cutting and self-harm. So when we move up to the high school level, which are our 9th and 11th grade, we see those percentages increase again. So when we look at this mental health piece, how many of you are seeing an uptick just working with your students, knowing your students pre-COVID to now? How many of you are seeing more students struggling with depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts and ideations? Are you seeing it increased? You see a thumbs up, increase. And now we're getting more supports, but still it's hard when you look at the reality. Not all of our students are actually getting the support, even though they know they need it. And so when we're looking at 1 in 5 getting mental health services, that we got to fix that. Also, the issue is trying to get a therapist. There's a lot of therapists who are still doing virtual, or their caseloads are packed and they can't take on another person. And so we're struggling with trying to keep up with the need in the state. Oops. So something also to look at, because percentages are just percentages, right? We say 15.7% of our students in Saginaw County had made a plan of how they would attempt suicide. That equates to 196 of our students. And those are just, and we had about half of our high schools, 9th and 11th grade students actually complete the survey. So the question becomes, not only do we have to look at the percentages, but we have to look at the numbers too, because same data presented in a different way, which one has more impact? For me, it's this number, the actual number of students. And so it's really important when you are looking at this data to consider those pieces. So they hit on, the Myfi hits on a variety of different topics. I just wanted to showcase some of those pieces. When you look at the connectedness, it's how often do I have a say in rules? How often do I have a say in what gets done in the school? And so when we look at those pieces, that's what we need to focus on too, is where is that disconnect as far as engagement? How do we give students voice in areas that we can give them student voice? We can give them their voice. I always joke around about, like, when my kids were little and we were going someplace nice, I didn't tell them that they could go anywhere in their closet and put on anything that they wanted, right? I said, you have this outfit or this outfit. Which one do you want to wear? And so when we think about student voice, I think it's also important to understand, yes, they can't have student voice in everything, right? But what can they have student voice in? And where within those parameters can they fall? It might be, we can't have this as a dress code option, but we could have this or this. What makes more sense? And giving them voice that way, I think, is key. So if you're interested in the Myfi survey, like I said, it's free and it closes the June 3rd. So the end of the school year, close to the end of the school year, it closes. When you close out, you get your data results pretty quickly. So you can then use them. And if you're using this as part of your continuous improvement plan, the Myfi survey is a great tool to help get that, gauge that voice. So skills that build resilience. I'm going to quickly go over the 5 competencies because I'm sure most of you have seen them before, but this is their castle. I think they have the best outline of what these look like. When we talk about those 5 competencies, it's self-awareness. We're looking at social awareness. Sorry, gotta let some people in. I've been talking all day. I'm not used to this. You guys are like rock stars. Give me 1 minute. Okay. So Castle has these 5 competencies. So when you're talking self-awareness, it's really being in tune with who you are, knowing your emotions, how your values and emotions and thoughts can impact behavior, making that link, which I think our students sometimes struggle with. Doesn't matter where they fall in the pre-K, post secondary realm. Having being able to recognize their strengths. How many of your students struggle with taking a compliment, accepting a compliment? We have some students that struggle with that. Knowing what their strengths are, but also knowing those areas that they want to improve on. Really focusing on that growth mindset and that sense of accomplishment and optimism. So when we look at social awareness, it's that empathy piece, right? It's how does that other person feel? Appreciating diversity, respecting others and their similarities and their differences. It's that cultural piece. And then when we look at that responsible decision making, helping them to identify the problems, analyzing those situations, figuring out what options are for a solution, trying them, evaluating them, and then reflecting on that. But then also it's that self-management. How do I control my impulses? How do I manage stress and anxiety? How do I manage everything that's coming at me? How do I set goals and organize my life, my brain? I don't know about you, but half the time my computer is like my brain. I have a lot of tabs open. How do I organize that and figure that out? And then finally, relationship skills. How do we communicate effectively with people? How do we express differences and frustrations in a respectful way? And all of that plays a part in building that resilience and being successful. Now for the strategies. So really looking at what can we do? Positive psychology is really great in that it's a it's a strength-based model. It focuses on the strengths of individuals rather than maybe their gaps and their weaknesses. Oftentimes, when we look at how the education system structurally is set up, it often falls in that undesirable traits based on passing or failing, or, it doesn't really look at those nuances of students that make them unique and successful. And positive psychology really looks at that. Like, how do we look beyond sometimes the behavior, the struggle, and help students learn what their strengths are to overcome some of those obstacles? Sometimes we have students who are shy and don't want to take that risk. How do we help them understand that they have strengths that they bring to the table that the rest of their peers need to see and hear when they're focused on maybe those traits that they aren't really proud of within themselves? And so that piece is really key. When we look at that positive psychology and we look at those characteristics that build that resilience, it's how do we create that safe, stable, and secure physical environment? It's how do we create that psychological safe space? How do we form those tight-knit communities as a classroom and as a building? How do we give students that sense of belonging and identification? How do we look at those positive social norms and really encouraging and promoting and recommending and commenting and rewarding that? And then how do we have opportunities for skill building and decision making and planning within the scope of work of what we do. So these aren't just, we're going to throw this in a health class, or we're just going to throw this in advisory or homeroom. But these are things that can be embedded no matter what subject you teach in your buildings. So when we look at that safe, stable, and secure physical environment, what does that mean? Really, we're looking at, is it safe from bullying situations? Have we created that? Is it safe for all students, all ethnicities, all religions? Is it safe for our LGBTQ populations? Making sure that it's safe for all. And is every area safe? It is amazing. I have 2 high schoolers at home, and you can ask them, where are the unsafe places in a building? And there's a certain hallway, and it's the bathrooms. Because there's so many things that go on there. So how do we determine where our unsafe areas are? And then what do we do about it to create that safety piece? And then making sure our rules are fairly enforced, that they're not partial. Behavioral psychology. Yes, exactly. And then that clear communication on expectations. So what are those expectations? Our students need to know what the plan is. We love to know what the plan is. And so oftentimes at the elementary level, we have, okay, this is when we go to recess, and this is when we have lunch, and we have everything broken down. And then we kind of sometimes stop once we get to high school. Our anxious kids like to be able to see what that schedule is, even if they know school ends at 2:54. Seeing it on the wall and being able to link it up to what the clock says in that classroom is just one of those things that they don't have to worry about. And so that is really something as simple as that, is having the routine and the schedule listed, is that clear communication of what's expected. Having clear communication in routines in your classroom. You know, when we come in, we always do this. At the end of the wrap up of class, we always do this. So having those routines, and those were important before we were dealing with COVID and additional trauma. You know, the COVID trauma kind of hit in, and we have kids. And I think the biggest thing too is, because this has been going on so long, we forget we're still living in it, and our students are still living in it. And so really being able to look at how do we create these structures in place to give students that sense of safety, which for us seems really common sense and easy, but for them, it can really make a huge difference. Any questions so far on that safe and stable and secure environment?
I noticed there was one question. So they were asking if there's any particular authors or books related to this SEL that you would recommend as ones that would be kind of a must read.
I would say I would go to Castle's website when and Mark's putting on there John Watson. Yes. Castle has some great resources around building and supporting SEL with students, that also builds that resilience piece. And that would be a huge resource, because it also looks at it from a structural standpoint too, of how we get systems in place. But for sure. And someone else said routines are important for adult learners as well. Exactly. So what's good for us is good for our students too. And sometimes we forget about that. Okay. When we look at that psychological safe place, we're looking at some quadrants of psychological safety. So when we're looking at that learner safety, what we're really looking at is is it safe in your classroom or in your building to discover and ask questions and to learn from mistakes? How many of you have students that will not raise their hand because they're afraid that their answer is wrong? I still sometimes worry about that as an adult when I'm at places. So do you have that ability? Have you created that culture and climate such that it's safe to learn? Because learning leads to mistakes, which leads to more learning. And so how do we normalize those mistakes as part of learning? And it's what we do after that is celebrated. That, and how do we work towards that? When we look at that challenger safety, have we created an environment that allows people to challenge the status quo? So if we're looking at it from an equity lens, have we created an environment in our classroom that allows us to maybe call out or question inequities in whether it's in our classroom or in our society? Is that allowable to kind of and be able to kind of express ideas and offer up suggestions and changes? And so that piece is so key. But then when we look at that collaborator safety, is it safe to work together as a team? Have you created that relationship and trust that this team is one unit and they can have disagreements and have that open dialogue and still come to a solution? Or maybe they don't and they respectfully decide like, hey, we're not probably going to agree on that, and that's okay. But there's that mutual respect as that conversation is happening. And then that inclusion safety, knowing that I'm valued as a person in your classroom, knowing that I matter, my ideas, my experiences matter in this environment. And so really, how do we do that? Honestly, relationships. If we could have a one sentence professional development, and that's it, relationships are key. You build those relationships, and a lot of this is much easier to then implement. And so that piece is key. All of this really hits on just building those relationships to build that trust so that people are willing to try different things and to put themselves out there and know that no harm's going to come of them. So this is always the goal, encouraging mutual respect. It's not easy. You are exactly right. And it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of learning. And it just is, it's going to take time. And you're always, and there's always going to maybe be one or two students that just don't have that mutual respect, right? But how do we work and get most students feeling comfortable enough to kind of be vulnerable, right? And to share things so that we all can learn from them. Another one, Amy said, I point out when teaching digital literacy skills that grammar and spell check were created because so many people needed assistance in those areas. It's not just you. I love that analogy, Amy. That's huge because I have some words that I spell incorrectly all the time and I type it knowing that, but that is correct. They must agree that they could be wrong and that's okay. Exactly. And I think that's because we all make choices and decisions based on experience, right? And all of our experiences are different. So when we look at that supportive relationship and building that tight-knit community, there's like a few things, like how can we utilize common time to build sense of community? How can we use morning announcements to have some type of relationship building kind of quote or activity or something to kind of get the morning started, or get your classroom started? Taking a look at, if you have a homeroom or an open time, a study hall or something like that, where you could maybe create some opportunities to build those relationships. Restorative practices are a huge piece that really looks at how do we right our wrongs, but in a way that's respectful for both the victim and the person who needs who hurt the other person. How do we create those restorative practices pieces and create that sense of belonging and identifying I did something wrong and I'm going to make amends for that, and then being able to accept that. Any of you know zones of regulation? It's more of an elementary level thing. It's like 4 different colors for feelings. I say we adapt this at an adult level, so that when we start our classroom and we come in, we figure out what are we feeling, where are we at, so you might have students who are tired. You might have students who are angry or upset or had a bad day. And knowing that ahead of time helps you determine how you're going to move forward in your class. It also takes into mind if you can do this in a way that it's shared, so the peers understand when someone's having a bad day. I think that's huge. We have, and I said this in my last session, we have a transition center school for our students with developmental disabilities, and they put where they're at on the whiteboard when they come in, and the teachers don't have to do a thing. The students check and see where all of their peers are at, and if there's a student who's struggling or a student who is sad, they go and lift them up. The adults don't have to do anything. And so how do you create that tight-knit community where they feel comfortable enough to say, I'm having a really bad day? We also do a Handle with Care program that I think a lot of different communities are doing, where when law enforcement come and visit a home outside of school time, they let the school know. And all they say is, handle Amy with care. We don't need the information, but what that does is that also kind of gives us a heads up on how do we support that student, because oftentimes they won't tell us. They'll just come in, they'll put a smile on their face, or maybe not, and they just won't share until you ask. And then you find out, oh, we had a situation. Dad killed mom last night, and this student is in school this morning. So how do we create that support, right? Because I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I'd be in school the next day. But we have students who are bringing a lot of this baggage to school and not always sharing it. So how do we create that tight-knit community to where maybe they reveal a little bit more so we can support them up? Peer-to-peer programs, also awesome and led by peers. Guess what? We don't have to do all of the initiatives that we come up with, right? Like, it doesn't have to be just you doing the work. We can identify some leaders within the student population to help with this process. And really looking at, someone said that they created a calming lounge. So at the elementary level, they have calming corners in the same classroom, but basically they made like just a relaxing lounge, one for the adults, for the staff, and then one for their students. So when they needed a quick break, maybe maybe it was a stressful day and students need 5 minutes, they can go hang out in the calm lounge and then return when they're ready. Because I think the question becomes, if they're not ready to learn and they're dealing with something, is it better for them to be in your classroom, or is it better to maybe give them 5 minutes to go process and give them the skills to kind of calm down or regulate, get back to their regular emotions, and then enter your classroom? So I think that's key too. And you're right, the teacher must develop a relationship of trust with the students. That is number one. And that does not happen overnight, and that takes time. And so I think that piece is huge. My son had the nest at his school. Yes, when you feel overwhelmed or anxious, we all have that. Like I'm sitting here talking, like we need that for adults, a tap out, like, hey, I need 5 minutes because it's been rough, or I'm dealing with something at home that's coming into my brain while I'm here at work. I need 5 or 10 minutes. Our students need that too. And so how do we create these safe areas for them to go and decompress and then come back? But really what we're looking at when we're looking at student voice, the best way to get buy-in from students is really asking the students what they need and encouraging them to then lead it. And then maybe we as adults are just there to help facilitate, or we're a go-to when they have a question. And so I think that's huge. I was going to say cute, but I said cute because I saw coloring books, adult coloring books. I love that. Yeah, we all need that calming lounge. Like there's some I go in, I'm like, oh, this is fun. I like you walk in and you could feel your blood pressure just reduce, right? It's just relaxing. And our students need that as well. So as we're thinking about that student voice, making sure we're getting those pieces from students, because, with my work with Disability Network of Michigan, we can't be making decisions for people when they're not even at the table. And I feel that's the same way with our students. We wouldn't want someone coming up to us and say, hey, Amy, we had this meeting and we think you need to adjust A, B, and C. Go. Yeah, that's not going to work for me, right? Like I'm going to dig my heels in. Or I'm going to ask some questions. So how do we bring the students in to say, hey, what's needed? Hey, this is what our data is showing from the survey. You could give your own perception survey you wouldn't even have to do Myfi, but you could create your own and say, this is what we're seeing. What do we need to do to build this up? And so looking at those students' voices, what are they passionate about? And helping them, based on that passion, what can they help plan? Can they help with school celebrations and theme days? Can they lead a wellness activity, a mindfulness or a yoga, or, does someone know karate or some Tai Chi that can give some tips? How do they become the masters and the leaders? And I think that's key. Have those students review the data, I think is just because a couple of things. It goes back to everyone's doing it, to when you see the data, not everyone's doing it. So you can do that social norming too with some of those pieces, but really it helps them say, yeah, this is a huge issue that I think we need to address. It helps prioritize. They can help plan the classroom rules. Yes. You get students doing the classroom rules, they are going to hold their peers more accountable than probably what you are. They might even be harder on their peers than what you would be. So however you can give them that voice and make those decisions are key. What are some things that you do to give students voice? I love that. What are you really good at? And what do you want me to know about you? That's perfect. There's an activity called Student Becomes the Master. And it's similar to that. What could you teach me? And I love that idea, because sometimes I feel like because they're students and it doesn't even matter if they're teenagers or young adults, we sometimes feel like we know more than they do. And how do we value and appreciate the knowledge that they have and what they can share with us? What do y'all do? Anything that you do that works that you'd like to share with the group around student voice and identifying those passions? Lunch is sitting in, I think. Yes. Okay. Questions that build that resilience. So when we're looking, okay, I just gave my English classes the opportunity to suggest topics for us to study. I love that. Career coaching with our GED instruction allows the students to explore themselves with a supportive structure. Nice. Love those ideas. Again, when there's that buy-in, they tend to gravitate towards that learning, right? And really own it. So when you're looking at those questions of how do I get students to think differently, some of the questions that you can ask are, what have you learned today? What is a mistake you made today that you learned from? And we might have to start. This is that whole building trust, is we might have to lead that discussion and be vulnerable. I think when students see us vulnerable, one, it connects that trust and it allows them to be vulnerable as well. We have to model what we want them to do. And I think that is key. What will you do the next time you're in this situation? So again, it's that learning from lessons, and that focus on growth over perfection, right? So whenever a student wants to share something they've written or sing a song, I totally let them. Yes. Raise food at Christmas time as a spirit of giving. Oh, I bet. Yes. I will also go on walks with the student, just a quick talk and a walk session. I love that idea too. So I kind of talked about embracing the F word, and that's like failure. So really looking at mastery versus not yet. So have I mastered something, or I haven't, or is it not yet? Not that I failed, not yet. So learning cannot take place without those failures. And unless you've mastered something, you're always in that not yet phase. And that's okay. That's where growth comes from. And so really changing that mindset of what we think failure is and what success is. Success is really learning from when things don't work out right, and changing it up and trying new things. And so I think that's really, really important. This was a great resource that I found that I thought would be interesting. It's called the Learning Pyramid. So after a unit or after your day's instruction, you ask the question. So the bottom part of the pyramid are things that you've learned today. And then the middle section is things you've been reminded of today. And the very top is questions you have about the lesson. And what that really does is helps you gauge where students are, but also gets them thinking about their own learning and what they knew about that topic before what they knew about that topic before you taught that lesson. Any questions? We have about 10 minutes. Speech on failure at Harvard's commencement is worship. I would agree. That is a great speech. Fail, first attempt at learning, for sure. But it all goes back to that building trust in your room, right? And building trust in your learning community, because I know my son in elementary, I actually went to the principal, and I typically wouldn't request teachers, but I was noticing a pattern. And so at the end of first grade, I went to the principal. I said, I need my son to have a teacher who's going to push him to the point where he fails at something and learns from it. Because right now he's not wanting to try anything if he's not 100% sure that he's right. And his second grade teacher really worked with him on challenging him, and he learned how to fail to grow. And I think that's huge. And I think that's something that we need to work on early on, but then we also need to continue that as they get older. And honestly, I'm still a work in progress on that. I don't like failure, even though I know it's an opportunity for growth, right? But that's something that we constantly have to work through. What questions do you have? How would you confront a student's failure? What would you say? I think the biggest piece, and here's the thing, my background is social work, so I'm all about feelings and stuff, and probably not so much like content and how, but I would talk about the process. I would ask questions like, hey, what were you hoping to get out of here? Where do you think you went differently along that learning path? What can I do to help that process along? And then let's have a plan. I think our biggest piece is, and I'm going to put my parent hat on, is not everything needs to be graded. So I think if we totally change how we maybe grade homework, and look at it as where am I at in that mastery level in that initial work, and where am I at? And then I think sometimes just rephrasing that helps with that learning and being okay with that failure. I think you need to address the feelings. I think we need to highlight the aspects that weren't a failure in that process, and then help them map out what they're going to do next time. So it's kind of a journey. But my daughter is a freshman, and one of her teachers just said, we're trying something different. I'm not grading homework because students are seeing their scores and they're shutting down. So we're going to assess where they're at on a scale at the start of this unit, and we're going to assess their learning and see where they're at as we progress through this unit, so they can see that success. And she goes, and it's an experiment. If it doesn't work, I'll go back to the grades, but it's not something that I want students to be worrying about. I want them to worry and be focused on learning and not about the grade. And so how do we shift that piece too? That meant that thought process, which is going to be hard. But having those conversations and helping them map out that process, pair them up with a peer too. That might be another opportunity to like work together, and how does one person travel that path of learning versus this student? How do they both process things differently around that subject, and being able to share? That is a huge SEL piece as well. I share an experience where I didn't succeed the first time or even the second time. I think that's great. Yes. I think when we're real with our students, that helps. And don't make it a big deal. Embrace it. Oh, shoot, you're the only X number of points away. Let's keep going. Exactly. Comfort or encouraging more effort? What's more important? I think you definitely want to do the encouraging. But I also think it's about personality and knowing your students and knowing what that motivation would be, and what their what's going to hook them, right? Like what's going to be, there's some students who don't want to be comforted. And so you try to comfort them and they're going to shut down. But I think it's that effort, right? We want to focus on the effort put in and not necessarily the outcome. And I think that's key. Anything else? Definitely that de-escalation. Failure, because keep in mind, in some scenarios, failure is not an okay thing for some of our students. If you look at their home life or you look in other aspects of their life, failure may be a really negative thing. And so you're fighting that battle, right? You're trying to find that balance of teaching them that it really is okay. And here it's safe for you to fail, and you'll be supported in learning from that. But I think we have to keep in mind too student experiences in that process. I talk to my students about their goals and keeping them accountable. Exactly. Oh, always thank them for being in my class today. I love that. Yes. Awesome. Anything else before? I think we have 3 minutes left. Oh, like it's all or nothing? Yes. Yes. Our students sometimes approach it as all or nothing. And there's so much in between all of that. And I think there's the story of the dash on for the birth and death of people, that dash. And I think that's where all of that comes into play, right? Like it's all that stuff in between that's so very important. And how do we get students to embrace that? Thank you, Anne. Well, just let me know if you all need any support or help. I think all of my information is on the app. I've downloaded all of my PowerPoints, but feel free to reach out to me. And I will, when I make the transition over to MDE, I'll let Patrick know. So if you reach out to me after November, he will have my new updated email address. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you for all of this. I know I've done. I think it was last year I was in one of your presentations, so we appreciate everything. I don't. Looks like all we got is a bunch of thank yous and congratulations coming through. I haven't seen any other questions. So on that note, thanks for doing this. Thanks for being here. I'm sure Patrick will be reaching out to you again for future conferences. And just a quick reminder to everybody, the sketch form, it is in the resource tab. I know there was some discussion on that. And I guess we're going to see if we can end this whole McKay fall conference with a bang. One more session. So on that note, thank you. And everybody enjoy that last session.